Hello, Dinara.
Hi, James.
So, yeah, today it's the new video. So we're looking at the questions 19 to 31. And this is an example, a simple example of getting the word in the correct form. So you'll need to think about, does this need to be an adjective, an adverb? What tense should this be? Would the verb be in? This sort of thing. So I think the easiest way to go about this is just have a look, read the rest of the sentence initially, and then just think to yourself, what would make sense in this particular text. So do you need a pronoun? Do you need a verb? Decide that, and then you can look at the correct form. And you can see clues from the rest of the sentence as to what it should be. Do you have any other tips?
No, I find this task easy for me now, but in the past I remember that one was difficult.
Yeah, it can be, absolutely, especially if you've got differences between, as in how tenses are formed or how words are used, how different parts of speech are used. So let's start with the beginning then, the thorn birds. So the thorn, question 19, the thorn birds, we can see it's we on the side is the correct, is what we're looking to use. The Thorn Birds is a 1977 best-selling novel by the Australian author Colin McCullough. The story gives information about life on Australian sheep stations, but it also includes a dramatic love story. So we can see immediately that because it's not the subject, you're going to need the object pronoun. So it's us. So the story gives us information about life on Australian sheep stations.
Have you heard about this book?
It rings a bell. So to use that phrase, so it sounds familiar, but I've never read it. But the name sounds a little bit familiar to me.
For some reason, it's quite popular in post-Soviet countries.
Yeah.
So I read it when I was a teenager in Russia.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Is it good?
When I was a teenager, I found it interesting, but now for me, I think all these love stories, they are boring to me.
Yeah, they get a little bit repetitive and a little bit cliched, quite a few. So I can understand that, absolutely. But yeah, so I mean, like I said, so that's a good phrase to know, by the way. It rings a bell. It sounds familiar. But, so it's not one I would have been able to say the name of it without prompting. But the fact that I see it, so aided awareness, as it were, it does ring a bell. So let's look at number 20. So the book, the writer, international fame, as soon as it was published. We can see it's bring on the side. So if you look at the clue here, it was published. We're talking about an event in the past, and it's a completed action. So it's the book brought the writer international fame as soon as it was published. That one's pretty straightforward. Now we'll move to the next one. In 1983, it was adapted into a TV miniseries, Richard Chamberlain and Rachel Ward. So here we've got star on the right-hand side. Here you need something called a gerund, okay? So that's starring, okay? So a gerund, just to remind everyone, it's when a verb behaves as a noun, okay? So, and it's starring. Another thing to watch out for is that you need to double the R. So you need to write starring with two R's in the middle. So star, then ring.
If we forget to write double R, it will be, we have to read staring, right?
Exactly, that's correct. And staring and starring are quite different, because staring is looking very, as in unbroken eye contact, basically looking with unbroken eye contact or unbroken, so if you're staring at something or someone, then you don't gaze away or blink or anything, you just stare. So that's quite different from starring, which is obviously that's because when we talk about shows or films or, film cinema generally, we talk about starring, So Then we'll see the next one. So, GPS functions. So GPS is obviously, it's the satellite navigation system you use to know where you're going. So car GPS tracking appears a lot in new vehicles, offering drivers tracking and navigation. Yet the inventions are even more modern and sophisticated, offering extra opportunities to people. So here you can't say late on its own, so you have to say the latest inventions, because it's meant in a specific context of the most recent inventions, is what it means in this context. So you couldn't say late or later. So it has to be latest.
And will it be a mistake if we write the most late? Because it's possible, but here it will be a mistake, right?
So yeah, it would be a mistake here, absolutely. So I haven't actually heard the most late before, because by and large, although I'm sure there are examples to the contrary, but by and large in English, when you have these very short adjectives, you use the ending est at the end of it. It tends to be with so when we're talking about one syllable adjectives, that's normal. That's the rule, rather than, there may be one or two exceptions that aren't coming to my mind right at this second in time, but that tends to be how it works. It's the longer ones, especially if they're 3 syllables or more, where you put most before it. But an important thing is you never put them together. So you do not say the most easiest. That's just wrong. It's the easiest. Okay. And you don't say comfortablest. It's the most comfortable.
Because it's long, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's long. Then the 2 syllable ones, it's a bit of a mix, and some of them actually can take either. So one example is I've heard people say most risky or most spicy, for example. But I've also heard people say riskiest and spiciest, so there are some where you can use either as well.
And always we have to use the with those words.
Yeah, absolutely. All superlatives need the, because they require talking about something specific and you're comparing 3 or more things. So it could be 5,000 things, so for example, if you say, for example, the tallest building on earth is the Burj Al Arab. So I hope it still is for that context, because there are, millions of buildings on earth. But, as in the tallest, so you're comparing all of them, is that building in Dubai. So yet exactly. So you do need to have the obviously, obviously you don't with comparatives where you're comparing 2 things. So, as in, so this came later than the other thing. So you don't need it in comparatives, but superlatives you do, which is what it is. So let's go to 23. So smart box technology is one example of how car GPS tracking systems, so smart box technology to lower car insurance. I think here it needs to be passive, are used. So that would make the most sense to me in this one, because, and the clue that you're looking out for here is to lower. And it would sound a bit strange to say, it doesn't really make sense to say, is one example of how car GPS tracking systems use to lower car insurance. So it just sounds a bit odd. So I would go the passive, are used to lower car insurance. So that's the best way to do it. Let's move to the next one. Not break. Okay, so this is an example. If the driver, so I'll just read it first. If the driver the rules, he gets a discount or an insurance premium. So this is an example of what's sometimes called the zero conditional in English. So it's a guaranteed result. So, and this one, it needs to be in the present simple tense. So it's if the driver doesn't break the rules, he gets a discount or an insurance premium.
For example, like the most popular example is if it rains tomorrow, we will go out.
That's a first conditional. So that's a likely. So, as in, so for example, just to explain the difference. So zero conditional, and it's sometimes written in inverted commas. Zero conditional is when there is a guaranteed result, as in something always happens if you do something, something else. So, for example, water boils at, so if you boil water to 100 degrees, it turns to vapor. Okay. Obviously, barring, specific conditions like, for example, are you on the top of Mount Everest? Mount Everest, for example, it might be a bit different. But, but that's an example of a guaranteed result. The first conditional is a likely result. So, for example, if you study hard, you will get good grades. So you will get better grades. So that's an example. If it rains, we won't go out. So it's a likely result, but it's not guaranteed.
I see. Interesting. Thank you.
And the first conditional for that reason is so it's often also used for stronger offers. So, for example, if you buy this today, we will give you a 10% discount. So you often seen it used for strong offers in business negotiations.
I see.
So we'll move to the next one. So without doubt, this new technology, so we've got popular among drivers very soon. So they're very, very certain that this will happen. So this new technology will become popular, works best here. So as in, so I would go with will for this one. So as in, because there's no decision that's been made by someone beforehand. Because if you've already made a decision, the important thing to remember is that we use going to. So forming the future in English is a little bit complicated, but it's will become in this context. Let's move to 26 then. So we've got a similar idea with this exercise, with this page, So Auckland is the largest and most populous city in New Zealand. The of Auckland is getting close to 1.4 million residents. So here we can see with the, and we've got the before it, the definite article, and of Auckland. It has to be a noun in that. So in that way, it's going to be the population is what. So population for that, exactly. And so it is situated in the North Island of the country, between the Waitakere Ranges and the Hauraki Gulf. So here, because we know that it's not describing the pronoun, it is situated, so it's describing the verb. And the verbs, so where it's situated. So in that case, we need to use an adverb. And just like most adverbs in English, although not all of them, for example, fast, well, and hard are examples that don't. But as in almost all of them follow the rule of adding ly at the end. So it's conveniently situated.
But you say hardly. No?
Yeah, but hardly means something different. So hardly and hard. If you work hard, then you really put effort in to working.
I see. Yes.
Whereas hardly means, as in almost not.
Barely.
So exactly, it's like barely. So for example, we hardly ever meet. so it's someone you hardly ever see. If it's someone you almost never see, if it's we hardly ever meet or we hardly ever see each other, then it's someone you almost never see. Yeah. So that's an example. So hard and hardly are different, Then the next one we've got here, the city enjoys an oceanic climate, which is to the climate in most of Europe. Okay, so here we can see, because it's coming after the verb and there's no other, as in past participle or anything, or present participle after that, it makes most sense to have an adjective here. So is comparable in English. So is comparable to the climate in most of Europe. Okay. Nothing can you about Auckland, which is why it is a popular destination for numerous immigrants to New Zealand. Now, I stopped there because I think this is a typing mistake. They've missed. For me, it would make sense to write disappoint, because disappoint and appoint, they aren't simple antonyms. They don't just mean the opposite thing. They mean totally different things. So, for example, you can be appointed, if you're appointed for a particular position or job, then it means that somebody is, somebody higher up said, you can do it, so as in, so you are the one to do it. That's a point. Obviously, we have appointment, for example, is when you, as in you have an appointment with, it's like a meeting at a certain time. So you have an appointment with the doctor, you have an appointment with the dentist, or an appointment with a solicitor or a lawyer, for example. So I think this is a mistake personally, because nothing can appoint you about Auckland doesn't really make sense. It's disappoint. It would need to be disappoint. Right. Okay. So they're treating them as if they're highly related words, but they're not really that related. Well,
because different meanings, right?
Yeah, totally different meanings, and they're not simple opposites. So most of the time, antonyms are simple opposites. Easy, hard. As in heavy, light. As in, so most of the time an antonym is something that is the direct, comfortable, uncomfortable, so most of the time it's something that's directly opposite in meaning. But here, no. So, yeah, we'll carry on.
So guys, please, when you find yourself confused, it's okay. So there are mistakes. And obviously, we just need to accept it.
Yeah, exactly. So just work with whatever's written in the text. Because overall, it's pretty good. It's just that one is a bit odd, that one. So I generally only comment if it's really odd.
For me, it's very odd. They can find professional teachers from the UK or from the US, and who will help to point out these mistakes. But I don't know why they don't do it, and it's not expensive. It's like
they just don't bother. Extra hassle, extra expense, I guess. So they just
more maybe even hassle, because it's not like millions of dollars.
No, exactly. As in, you do it for a relatively low fee. You could get someone to quickly proofread this. So it's. Because this is going out to, probably millions of students, millions of pupils. So, I mean, it does seem a bit lazy. So, expats, we'll go to number 30 then. So, expats have an overall good experience when staying in Auckland. So, most expats find it very easy to communicate with the locals, who are very yeah, so most expats find it very easy to communicate with the locals, who are very, well, it has to be an adjective here, friendly. Now, this ties back with something else we were saying. So almost all the time, the ly endings, so adverbs end with ly. There are some adjectives that end with ly as well, but they're quite rare. And friendly is is the best example. So friendly is an adjective. It's so it's not an adverb. Friendly, who are very friendly. Good. Another positive thing about Auckland is the amount of nature and free space, which is appreciated a lot, especially by those coming from more densely inhabited. And then it's locate. Well, here it has to be a noun again. So locations. Yeah, so that's it for this one then. Okay, so yeah.
James, to be honest, I still find this task difficult. Even though, and what kind of advices you can give as a teacher to prepare for this part?
So I think it's essentially just remember the different types of parts of speech is a good one. So just so if you focus on, you practice. For example, what, just to remind yourself of what the adjectives, the adverbs, the verbs, the nouns are. So what you could do, for example, is word webs. For example, so you go, so for example, let's look at one example here, locate. So you could put, so locate, and then you think, so it can be a verb. To locate, and it can also be a noun, and there's a related noun which is location. Okay, so and obviously as the verb, it's a regular verb, so it's gonna so the endings that it could have are either locating as a present participle, or it could be located or locates. So so this one, for example, can only really be a noun or a verb, but then so other ones, it could be, it's likely to be an adjective. So I think that's one thing that I would do is just think about remember the different parts of speech, and you'll see certain patterns that make it easier. So, when we look at number one, we know that it's a pronoun. That makes it a bit easier. So we know from the word order that it has to be an object pronoun, and the sense of it has to be an object pronoun. Other ones, if you see the in front of it, then the chances are it is going to be a noun or possibly a superlative adjective. So, and if it's so I think it's get a good sense of the text and remind yourself, okay, so is this a naming word? So then it's a noun. Is it describing the subject or another noun? So then it's going to be an adjective. And then is it describing the verb? It's going to be an adverb. So if you look at the different parts of speech, so remind yourself of the different parts of speech, that will help.
Luckily, in English, we have very strict word order, and
yes,
it really helps.
Yeah, absolutely. It does, because English doesn't have cases anymore. Well, barely, just, as in doesn't really have cases anymore. So the word order is incredibly strict for that reason, because if you change the, as in, to give you some examples, in some languages you can use, so if you have the sentence, the dog bites the man, you cannot change that the other way around. You might be able to say the man is bitten by the dog, so you totally change the voice, but if you write the dog bites the man and the man bites the dog, they're two totally different meanings. Whereas in other languages, it might, as in you can still have the same meaning as long as the case is there. But English doesn't have cases. So the word order is incredibly strict. And that does help in these contexts, because you'll know what part of speech it is.
Did English have cases in the past?
Yeah, absolutely, it did. So when you look at Old English, so the original, the language that was spoken by the Anglo-Saxons when they came over from northern Germany and southern Denmark and the northern Netherlands. which is where the language was born, basically. But when they came over to England, so then they brought this language with them, and it was the Germanic languages spoken at the time all had cases. So it was a highly inflected language, and you still see that in German has retained that inflected nature. So it didn't change that, but English had a very unique history, and because it lost its inflected nature, it was quite conservative with the pronunciation, but with the grammar, it was quite radical. So, and through interacting particularly with Old Norse, which is a North Germanic language, not a West Germanic one, like Old English, the word order changed, and it lost its inflected nature. So I think it's because you have this long period early on in the language's history where people are speaking to related but not the languages, but they're not quite the same, that people that the inflections sort of dropped. And then so by the time so after that, and as in later on in the language, it doesn't have an inflected nature anymore. So it hasn't inflected for 1,000 years or so. Interesting.
Do you agree with some linguists who consider that certain languages, their grammar became easier in time because like other nations started speaking this language, for example, English?
So I think that so as in if I think that I think it's more related to the influence of the empire later is more you see that more in terms of where English is used as an official language or a lingua franca in certain other areas, and also in some loan words that came into the English language. So I don't think that's the reason why it became simplified. I think it's more related to the first, say, 700-800 years of its existence. It's just historical and social factors there. So you have particularly a very long period of, say, 200 to 200 years or so, where in many parts of the country, both two languages were spoken that were related, but not quite the same, which is why, so to give you a classic example, so there are two very unusual parts with English. That this interaction between Old English and Old Norse is key because, for one thing, if I look at the word order of English now with modal verbs, normally West Germanic languages, they will put, if you use a modal verb like can or should, or, as in must, you have to put the other verb at the end of the sentence. So to give you an example, in German, it's ich kann Klavier spielen. In Dutch, it's ich kann Piano spielen. As in, but in English, it's I can play piano, not I can piano play.
Interesting.
And Old English got that from Old Norse. So as in it borrowed certain word structures. So it could be an example of what we call creolization. So when you have speakers of different languages where their languages are similar, but not, they have to basically speak in a slightly simplified way to each other.
To understand each other.
To understand each other. And another interesting part with that period is English borrowed the pronoun they, and that is incredibly rare. It's very rare for a language to borrow a pronoun from another language. And then obviously, so that's the biggest part of it. And then obviously the next thing that really changed the language a lot, but it's more with basically the vocabulary, is the influence of Norman French in particular, after the Norman conquest. Because you
11th century, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's 1066. So you have a period of, and it was a complete, the aristocratic class was completely, as in the old aristocratic class was completely removed, the old aristocratic class. And so a new one was placed in, which they only spoke, and it was quite brutal, but they only spoke Norman French, the kings and the nobles. And then, but then the peasants, obviously the people of lower social status, they were speaking Old English, which is, and that situation continued for nearly 300 years. As in, you don't have a king of England from that period being able to speak English until the 14th century after that. So, English worked its way back up to get to the top again by the 14th century. So it is interesting. And you can still see similarities you can still see the influence of that social dynamic in the words for the meat and the meat and the animal. So the animal's name is usually Old English, and then the animal's name is usually Old English, and then the meat's name comes from Norman French. So pig, pork. So as in cow, beef. So it's interesting.
So beef is from let's say Norman French.
Yes, exactly.
Also, I've heard that before Norman French influence, English sounded very more, let's say, less soft.
Oh, well, it was much more distinctly Germanic. I mean, so Old English is things like I know huertu, so as in that would be how are you in Old English. So it's personally, I think it is a beautiful language, but it's very different. So to modern English. So modern English changed particularly with the vowels a lot during that phase from Middle English into early modern English. So the thing is, if I listen to Old English, it sounds so different that, I only pick out certain words in Old English. I generally don't understand what they're saying at all. But when you move up to about Chaucer's time of 14th century, I can follow it just about. It's difficult, and I don't get every word, and I have to sort of concentrate. And if I'm reading it, I need to read the text out loud to understand it, because it's written so differently. As in the vowels are quite different. So I remember the beginning of Chaucer, you've got the prologue to the Canterbury Tales. Juan that April with his sure sorter, the docht of March hath persid to the rota, and bathed every vine in switch liqueur. Yeah, so it's of which engendred is the fleur. I think it is. So yeah, okay, it's tricky, but as in after a bit of after checking a couple words, I do understand what they're talking. When that April, with his shores sorter, so with his showers soaked, I think it was. The drocht, so that's the drought of March. Have pierced to the rota, has pierced to the root. So it's much easier to understand by this point. But it's easier to understand, but it's still challenging. But it's really Shakespeare that you understand. As in that's the point where you can really understand what they're saying. Again, there are some words, obviously the pronunciation has changed a bit, and there are some words that you don't get, but that's when it's really changed.
And when you were saying it in Old English, it sounded to me very Scottish.
Well, it's very, so I've heard lots of people, the thing is that Scottish, it could be a little bit Scottish, so that huet, it's because they had a stronger R, I think, not entirely sure about that. So, but, so they have lots of they have certain consonants that don't exist in, sounds that don't exist in English anymore, the h. and that's very distinctive for Scots. So if you listen to so Scots, the language or dialect, depending on your opinion. Personally, I consider it a language. The Scots language, so it's very much, you have you do have ch and ch as these sounds that you still have in German. You do have them in Scots. So for example, bricht, as in bright, or so loch for a lake, for a type of lake. So that's, I think that's part of it, and it's got very open vowels. So it's got very sort of open vowels, Old English. So I think it does sound more classically Germanic because it doesn't have the vocabulary influence that Norman French brought. So exactly.
I was listening to one lecture of one American professor, and I don't remember which topic, and I was shocked when he says not what, he says what.
Yeah, what. Yeah, that is the old way to say it. So if you listen to that, is I think it's a beautiful sound, that one. So you get it in certain varieties of American English. And some varieties of British English, you still get that old sound. We call it so in what's known as General American, which is actually a series of accents that are similarly related. So as in non-regional accent American, basically General American we call it, and RP, which is received pronunciation, so what people think of as the classic
American
British English. So both of those varieties do not do that sound anymore. Do not make that sound anymore. The wh, so which, when, what, but it is the old sound for the WH. So it is the old way to say it.
And also another thing I've noticed, I remember when I did my short terms in the UK, and they were studying with me guys from let's say high class, and their pronunciation, you can hear their Queen's English, and some of them, even though they were young, they were speaking with soft L sound. It was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So you do get lots of them, and the thing is that even that RP, it's an interesting case, because one thing to remember about RP, as it's called, received pronunciation, is that it is a minority accent and dialect. It's what we call a prestige dialect. So it's one that's spoken basically everywhere, but it's as in, it tends to be, if you're privately educated or if you're in a certain
circle.
Exactly, a certain circle, and so that tends to be where it's most commonly spoken. Obviously, you can also pick up that if you're surrounded by certain people at university, for example, as well. But that itself has changed quite a bit, and there are different varieties of it, which is why even when you use terms like received pronunciation and General American, there's quite a bit of range within those terms. So you can get very extreme versions of the RP accent that aristocrats speak, for example, and it sounds very odd. So they do some very odd things with with the vowels, basically. So the diphthongs especially. So heis, I've heard people say very, very posh aristocratic people say heis. I brought a new house in Edinburgh. So heis.
Yes.
House. Right. And taste. Would you like some taste? Yeah, so toast, which is
oh my
a
gosh.
very extreme version of it. And it sounds a bit odd when you get to that level. And the interesting thing is I actually listened to recordings of, and obviously, if you watch old, like, for example, those news reels during the Second World War. If you listen to that, they have quite a clip, and now we went off to, we saw them off down at, and blah, 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 and the D-Day landings were successful, and blah, blah, so you hear this very extreme version, which with quite a sort of over-the-top version of it. And this extreme version, it's very interesting, but that extreme version of that extreme version of the language is very much that extreme version of it was very popular in the 1920s to the 1950s, or to the 1960s to a degree, and nowadays it's. And it softened after that. So you can even hear that when the Queen when you said the Queen's English, when you hear her speak at the beginning, obviously, she was 25 when she got on the throne. She's now,
96.
Yeah, so obviously, as in her voice has naturally deepened. So as in, because that happens to everybody as they age. But but you can even hear the way she spoke, as in it's very much, so at the beginning it's I wish all our subjects, blah blah blah. Yeah, so it's very much, yes, it was this very, it was more extreme than it is now. But the interesting thing is, if you listen to recordings, because we do have some audio recordings from about the turn of the century, it's not that extreme. It is a little bit, the RP accent was not that, so they might slightly overdo time, for example. They'd say time or something, but that generally it sounded more similar to one now. It was just in the 20s to the 50s, it got quite over the top for some reason. So probably the influence of the theatre, I would imagine.
True. And then TV has changed everything because it became more available to people. And another question: have you noticed that in American cartoons, Disney, for example, evils, or most evils, they have British accents?
The villains, yeah, exactly. I think that's for a few different reasons. Basically, it's this concept of like a sophisticated villain will have a British accent, or as in, and obviously, I mean, British actors generally are overrepresented in Hollywood. So compared to the size of I mean, obviously, the UK is quite a big country, but it's nothing like the size of the UK. And there is, I think, there is a very, very big cultural scene generally in the UK. So you do get a lot of British actors. So, I mean, even if you look at dramas and tales that are, the films that are totally set in an American setting, they often have a lot of British actors on them. So a good example of that, so that there's many examples of that. I mean, even 12 Years a Slave, for example, 3 of the main protagonists are from the UK. So as in, and obviously the chief protagonist and the two main antagonists, I should say, they're all from the UK. So British actors have been very successful generally in Hollywood, but I think also obviously that specific variety of so sometimes Americans, they have a mixed relationship to it. So, because obviously, it sounds really beautiful, it's lovely, and blah, blah, blah. But then also it can sometimes sound haughty and, so a bit condescending. So I think it just became, so it's a mixture of things. It just suits a villain, so a villain sounds better with an English accent, I think, is what they ended up deciding. So
plus maybe because usually compared to Americans, maybe British, they are more, let's say, calmer, and usually evils, they are cool, like less emotions. They take decisions rationally.
Yeah, so it could that could be part of it as well. So I think it's and then also what often happens in film is that you get, for example, a villain is that they just start to use a particular type of villain, and then then that becomes a stock character by accident. Oh, this works, this sells, okay, we'll keep making it. As in it at the end of the day, cinema, movies, they are a form of entertainment to be sold and consumed by the public. So so it is interesting.
Thank you. It was extremely interesting, and this let's say it will be interesting not only to, like, in general, to everyone who not only studies English, but to native speakers. James, looking forward, and guys, subscribe to our social media, and you'll find not only useful information, plus you'll be able to win 1 month of classes at our school and study English for free at our school. Bye, James.
Bye-bye.